And thank you for the follow, Rhea.
Of course.
And we are live, so and welcome raiders to the to CONduit, our first year. This panel is editors, what they do and where to find them. Our panel lead is ElementEds or Tal, pronouns she,
Hi,
her,
everyone.
and our other panelist is Rhea with a they, them, or he, him. And they are our panelists today, and they will be discussing exactly what it is for editors. Over to you there, Tal.
Okay, great. So, hi, everyone. Welcome in. Thanks for coming to stick with our little panel here. I thought first we'd talk about what an editor does. So, Rhea, what is it? Actually, let's introduce ourselves first. Rhea, how about you go first, and then I'll follow you.
Sure. Yeah. So I am Rhea. I stream on Twitch sometimes as El Rhea. And I used to work as an academic editor, but I made the switch over to fiction because I write fiction, and I am very passionate about good stories, especially tragic epics. Also, you can find me on Twitter, where I'm happy to answer any questions about editing or self-editing or query letter writing. And yeah, back to you, Tal.
Great, fabulous. How long have you been editing for?
So I've been doing fiction editing for about 2 years now, but I was an academic editor before that for like 6 years.
Wow, wow, yeah, so quite some time. That's great. So I'm Tal. You'll see me floating around Twitch as ElementEds, which is Element Editing Services. I've been an editor for 10 years, 7 of those running my own business and full time in fiction editing. So I specialize in fantasy and science fiction editing and generalized and speculative fiction. I'm always happy to have questions. So if you have any questions at any point, always feel free to drop by my stream. Now, what an editor does. This is interesting. So we have you're a developmental editor, Rhea, and I do developmental editing, but most of my work is line editing. So there's a bit of a difference between the two of us. So why don't you tell us what developmental editing is and what you do in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, so developmental editing is essentially editing the form of the writing or editing sorry, the content of the writing. So essentially, um, it's things like checking to see if your plot structure is right, or if your elements of like character development are having payoff later in the story. Those sorts of things. You're tracking things like you're tracking the structural elements of a story rather than tracking the more fundamental like writing pieces. You're not necessarily looking at like a piece of writing and going like, oh, are all the commas in the right place? But you're more looking to see that, is this chapter where it should be? Are these characters saying what they should be in this place? And are they interacting the way that we've come to expect these characters would interact? And yeah, it's very different from something like line editing.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I love developmental editing. I just don't get a lot of it come through on my desk. So with what I do is line editing and copy editing for the most part. They are actually different. Line editing deals with like run-on sentences, words that are overused or repetitive, tightens the writing, works on pace, characters setting, that kind of thing, flags inconsistencies. And copy editing is the technical side of things, so commas and punctuation, spelling, that kind of thing. And but most editors, when they speak about line editing or copy editing, especially in fiction, the fiction realm, they take a holistic approach and they do both. So you'll notice that every editor is going to have on their website a description of their services, or they should, one would hope. So if you're hiring an editor, you want to be looking at what that editor is saying their services do, because they may just be offering line editing, that non-holistic approach, or they may be offering a combined approach. And then, of course, with something like developmental editing, you've got substantive, structural content. These can all be different things, and they can all be the same thing. So it's really important to get on your editor's website and sort of find out exactly what they're offering for their services.
All right, I'm going
Now,
to interject for just a moment.
yeah, sure.
For any of our viewers who have questions, if you use the little flag at the bottom for authenticity points, there is one button, a 1 point reward for questions, which will put it in the queue and make it easier for us to find it. Thanks, James. Games.
Thank you. That's great. Awesome.
And
And hi, Justin.
I don't know why I
um,
haven't, but
Okie dokie. So with other editor services, do you offer any? Do you do any other services, or do you know of any other services, Rhea, that you deal with on a day-to-day basis? Or
Yeah, so I mean, I do primarily I work with developmental editing because it's the editing that takes the most conversations, I think. So I prefer to work sort of with clients a lot on developing their writing and developing their stories. And I like to say I'm a bit more of like a hands-on editor, because one of the biggest things that I look for is the author's intent for the story. And I think if there are a lot of editing um, services where they sort of take it and they look at it without needing to like hear from you or anything like that. And I very much try to get in the author's mindset of like, how are you trying to shape this story, and how can we better get it to fit what you are going for, what you want the reader to experience. And so that's why I sort of take a lot of like it takes a lot of conversations. It takes a lot of like working with an author, and um, it can be a little bit less like nitty gritty, I guess. It can be it doesn't require as much of the sort of reading on reading on reading, layers on layers of going back through the sentences and things like that for um, so that's sort of, I think, my preference. Although I also have worked and dabbled in line editing and whatnot, so I will offer those services, but it's probably not the I'm not the number one person for that.
yeah, yeah. I'm a bit the same in as much as having that partnership with the client or the author. And a lot of the clients that come to me, they are brand new editors, brand new authors, and they haven't published before, so they're looking for that guiding hand to sort of publish their book and bring it all together into one coherent piece, which is, it's really fun. I love working with them and bringing that product to the end. um, Now, just to cover a couple of other things with that editors do, editors also do assessments, critiques, and reports. Again, these can be different things and they can be the same thing. So again, check with your editor. Coaching and mentoring. Um, some will do book coaching, some will do author mentoring, which can be the same thing. Again, they can be different things. We love the terminology, don't we?
Yeah. And your
um,
previous comment was a perfect lead in for our first question, actually.
yeah.
Is there any red flags you should look out for when looking for an editor?
So I knew this one was going to come up. This one always comes up, and it can get fairly contentious. So I've written a list of things that can be red flags. So I hope it's all right if I start with that, Rhea. But I would just want to put a caveat there that it's really different. It's really important to understand that one red flag doesn't necessarily a problem make. And one person's red flag is it's a non-issue for another person. So, for example, not charging enough is can be a red flag, and charging too much can be a red flag. Doing sample edits can be a red flag. Not doing sample edits can be a red flag. So you see that there's a whole bunch of different ones that they sort of have on both sides. So Rhea, can you think of any red flags that you want to bring up?
Yeah, I would say probably one of the biggest red flags for me when I've been shopping for editors before was they don't have any questions for you. Or they don't have enough questions for you. Like an editor usually, I think you want your editor to be a little bit selective about the things that they might take on, or at least, not necessarily willing to just um, open up their services immediately for like every single project you could possibly offer them. They want something that's going to fit their repertoire of what they're used to editing. So if you're looking for someone who edits fantasy stories, and you approach this company and they just say we offer editing services, and they don't ask you about like what is the genre you're writing for, what is the audience you're writing for. That's a really big red flag that
Big
they're
time.
either going to offer you like really generic editing, or they don't know what they're doing.
Yep, big time, big time. I find there's definitely with knowing what they're doing, um, there'll be people who say, you don't have an education, you don't have an official qualification in editing, but a lot of editing is learnt on the fly, or it's learnt through small courses done through Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreaders, or Editors and Proofreaders, or the Institute of Professional Editors and in Australia, Editorial Freelancers Association in America. There's associations everywhere, but training is done in many different ways. Your problem is going to be when they don't list any training at all. If they haven't got anything, they've just got, oh, blah, I am an editor and that's it. Then you've got problems. But experience counts for a lot. So you'll get some people who haven't done any formal training, but they've been editing for 10, 20 years. And it's good to keep up the training. It's good to uh, keep learning, because the editing profession is constantly changing, just like language is living, breathing, you know. But there's so many red flags and non-red flags. So, like for example, in the book, ask a book editor on Facebook, which is a fantastic resource. If you're interested in needing questions answered, um, there was a note brought up about NDAs. Now, authors want us editors to sign NDAs, but editors see that as a red flag, um, because most of the time in our contracts there's a confidentiality clause. So it usually means for us that the author is, could be quite needy. Um, and that's a bit scary from an editor's perspective, because we want to work with them. We don't want there to be a lack of trust. So the red flags go both ways.
All right. I'm going to skip Quiet Orison's question for a moment. Justin Toons has a question: is, should you edit yourself before handing it off to a real editor?
Go for it, Rhea.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think self-editing is very important, if only for the exercise. There is a lot you can learn by reading your own work that you wrote. And I think there's a lot that you can learn for your own writing, But then there's also a lot you can learn about editing and what your editor might, say to you when you hand it off to them. Even if you're bad at editing, I would recommend giving it a go. And having that self dialogue where you read your own story or your own work and you're asking, is this good? Is this sentence where it should be? Is this the word that I should be using here? Is this how this character should be responding to things in this moment? Those secondhand considerations are things that you can't really always get in the creative process in that moment when you're writing it. Because when you're writing it, you've got this like perfect image of a scene or whatever, and you're writing exactly what you want to be there, but you don't always think about. And I remember what I think Kat brought up on the other panel we were on, about the like white room syndrome. You want to be thinking about the senses. You want to be thinking, and so there are things that you have to ask yourself when you go back to read it. Did I consider all of these things while I was initially writing it? And I think that's an exercise that is incredibly valuable. You should always try to edit your own work first before pass it on to an editor for them to give you those suggestions as well.
Okay. As someone who is actually doing their own self edits before passing it along to an editor, I have found that reading it aloud helps you realize where you've missed words
Yeah, big time.
or pacing because all of a sudden you're going, I can't do this. It's too long.
Yep.
Yep. Or you'll notice you get out of breath and you're moving too quickly, so you need to slow the sentence down. Yep, reading out loud is really beneficial to the self-editing process. And if you can't do it yourself, you can get programs that will read it out for you so that you can listen in. Now, with just to add, I'm not a seller of books. I swear, I'm not a seller of books. I get no kickbacks from this. But there are 3 books that I'd like to put in chat. I don't know if I need a permit, Siobhan.
No,
This one is
you can drop links, no problem.
awesome. I'll drop links for these in a minute. But this one is Self-Editing for Self-Publishers by Richard Bradburn. This one is a really good, it's not too thick, so it's nice and approachable. That one tells you a bit about how to self-edit. This one here deals mostly with, it's the fantasy fiction formula. It's not a formula. It's not just for fantasy, but it does give you a really good insight into how to self-edit the story itself. So that's not a line editing book. This is more a developmental kind of work. And then this one is the one that I recommend to people, especially those who are publishing without an editor, which I don't recommend, but there is self-editing. This one here is The Magic of Fiction, Crafting Words into Story by Beth Hill. Beth Hill is an industry specialist, and this book is basically, it is a Bible for fiction editors. It is, I love this book so much. But if you're going to self-edit and you're not sure where to start, these books can be really, really handy. So I'll pop the links into chat for those. But yes, if you self-edit, you can save money because your editor will have less to do. So it's really up to you if you self-edit or not. You don't have to, but we do love it when you do.
And on that note of saving money, it's not. I mean, we don't charge per edit, but it goes a lot faster because usually we charge either by the page or by the hour, and it goes a lot faster for us if we don't have to, read. If you're line editing something, for instance, and it's already been edited up, that's going to go a lot
It's
easier.
a lot faster.
So if they're charging you by the hour, that's going to go down by a lot.
Yeah, big time, big time.
All right, and now I'm going to go back to Quiet Orison's question because it was in reference to something you were saying earlier there, Tal. What is the difference between book coaching and editing?
Okay, so book coaching, I don't offer book coaching, but I do know a lot of editors who do. Book coaching is walking an author through building their book and putting it together. So you might start off with a manuscript that's complete or complete, and then work together to make it into the best product it can be. Or you'll start off with an idea and the editor will walk you through building that book chapter by chapter, and it's a lengthy process. It can be quite expensive, but usually come out with quite a good product, and the learning curve is very steep. But yeah, book coaching and then editing is quite separate to that. Book coaching is dev editor. No, developmental editing is dealing with that manuscript at the end when it's all in one piece. Book coaching is quite often going through as the book is being built. So you, with the developmental editing, I'll let Rhea talk about that in a second, but mostly you want to make sure that your story is as close to where you need it to be as possible so that you have less work to do with your developmental editor or editor in general. But with a book coach, they can be it can be more fluid than that because you've got more room to move. You want that room to move so that you can alter characters, alter the setting, alter the plot if you need to. So there's more room to move in book coaching than there is in developmental editing, I find, um, because you need to be at different stages.
All right.
Yeah, I would 100%
Before
support that.
Rhea
I would also
starts in, sorry, just give me a moment,
go ahead.
because the next question will actually tie into this as well. What should a developmental editor offer that a good beta reader can't?
Um, a lot. So sort of a beta reader can be just about anybody. Now, if you can have really, really good beta readers, people who and ideally the beta reader is experienced in what the genre that you're asking them to read. If you've written a fantasy novel, you want to find beta readers who have read fantasy novels and are experienced with the genre and can tell you if this would fit on their shelf. But a developmental editor is usually a specialist in that genre or that area of writing. And so when you take your book to them, you're basically saying, okay, as somebody with industry experience in this entire field or in this entire genre of publishing, where would you see this fitting on the shelf, and how can I get it to fit in this place on the shelf instead? Or how can I, get I don't know if it would fit on the shelf at all. And the developmental editor is going to be able to tell you, here are the places where your story is weakest. Here are the places where you've got characters that need to be, changing what they're doing. A beta reader might be able to tell you those things, but that is a super high quality beta reader. Hold on to them.
Yeah, big time.
Most beta readers will probably only be able to answer fairly surface level questions because they're not usually experienced editors. They're not usually, in the market going for like, how can I get this to sell? And so what the beta reader the feedback they'll give you will be something like, I guess now that you mention it, it did kind of seem weird that your character Emily did this in this place, but like it didn't really pop out to me. I just didn't understand what was happening here. But the developmental editor is going to tell you instead of I didn't understand, they're going to say, right here, this is where it fell apart. This is the place we need to clean it up, pull these characters together, and do this.
Actually, I have a beta reader who actually ran as an alpha reader for me this time, and she loved the book. She loved what I'd written, but she pointed out areas that needed tightening or rewording or reworking entirely. She reads she read the Sword of Truth, like the first Wizard's First Rule, in under 8 hours.
Wow.
Wow.
That's a dedicated alpha reader right there.
She is an excellent reader and she has good retention, so she knows and she focuses on fantasy, and that's what I'm writing.
All right. Okay, so I guess we should probably talk about where to find editors as well. So in as much as uh, finding anyone, your first port of call is probably going to be word of mouth. Um, there'll be we're in a writing community. Find someone whose work you love, and find out who their editor is. That's the best bet. That's the quickest way of doing things. Um, but there's also going to be directories such as the FA, iPad, CEP, Yellow Pages. It's technically a directory. Um, Google. Uh, Again, you've got to be careful with Google, just like you would have to be careful with sites such as Reedsy, Fiverr, and Upwork,
Oh, and
um,
Twitter.
and Twitter, and Kboards. There's a whole bunch of places to find editors. It's just managing the pool of editors. So, are you getting professionals in that pool of editors, or are you getting a bunch of hacks? Because they are out there, and they will try and take your money. um, so Rhea, where would you go looking for an editor if you needed one?
So I usually go for editors from services that I know. So I initially was sort of like in my earliest days of writing, when I was looking for an editor for one of my stories, I just sort of went online and I just Googled it. And that was probably the worst thing I could have done. I found a lot of great services, but they were all very out of they were sort of what I would call like Editors Incorporated. You know, it's sort of those big name companies that just sort of they have those big houses of editors and shop out all of the work. And it's you're paying for a lot, and you're not necessarily always getting a lot of attention. And
Yep.
that's the big problem with it. So I actually just went and yeah, I did exactly what you said. I asked some writers that I knew, and I actually at the time I was still an academic editor. So I actually asked a lot of the professors that I was working with, because a lot of them, weirdly enough, knew people who were writing fiction,
Yep.
and they hooked me up with a lot of local people in my hometown at the time. And I found out about just some sort of mom and pop shop editing services, and they had tons of like packages that they were able to offer at a much uh, it wasn't necessarily a lower price. It was actually a fairly comparable price, but it was, I would say, if you can go local, that's probably the best way for you to get the most attention for the amount of money that you want to pay.
Oh,
And I
definitely.
think because that's they want to keep they want to keep the support for their their local clientele. That's something that they're really going to care about. If they know you're in that town with them, then they put a sort of priority on your work usually.
Yeah. And the community of us Twitch writers and whatnot, I actually have people who've done, I wouldn't say piecemeal, but it's trade. Like, I will edit this if you'll beta read this for me as well.
Yep.
Uh,
Bartering sound system.
yep. And I mean, because I know that Sable was editing for AG, and AG was editing for Sable. And of course, both of them being on the committees for this conduit, plus also being in the last panel on track 3. They couldn't be on this panel.
And I think it's also really important when you think about local. I mean, Twitch is like a locality. So like I think, if you approach somebody and you're in the Twitch Writers Network and you're saying, "Hey, I'm looking for editing services," I would say that that's the equivalent of doing something like, "Hey, I'm looking for somebody in my hometown," via like the word of mouth route. I mean, you're going to find the same kind of, attention, the same kind of like, we want to keep you around because it's like, yeah, we really care about growing this community.
We look in our communities. And it's like if I was looking for an editor for my own novel, I'd probably look in the Fiction Editors Network, which I'm part of. Um,
Yeah,
it's just the community that you connect with, and who you trust in those communities to help you with your work, whether that's paid or unpaid.
yeah. So For the Fish asks, if someone wants to be an editor, if someone wants to be an editor, what should they do?
Okay, so your first port of call is going to be getting some training. You can look at CAP in the UK for that, or the EFA in the US for that. If you're in Australia, it's iPad. Um, and if you're in a particular area, let me know, and I can give you a little bit more information on that. But they all hold training qualifications. You can do classes with them. There are some editors who run their own classes. You just want to make sure that they're comprehensive, and for example, in Australia we have accreditation, so you might be a professional level member, that kind of thing. You do training, and then you can go up in the list. So your first bet is going to be getting that training. Absolutely critical to get that training. Puppy dog.
Yeah. Ghost Puppy, she's popping through the virtual. Yeah. All right. Next question was from Anxhaze. How much consideration do you give to the editor's nationality when making your selection?
So as in like if I'm an American writer and I'm looking to hire an editor, should I care that they're Australian before I hire them?
I
Not
think if that's what they're talking about, then there's a number of considerations. Like, does the editor work in the industry standard that you want to be publishing in? So, for example, I work in British English, American English, and Australian English, but I don't work in Canadian English because I just don't have the training in it. Um, so there's your editor, choose your editor based on whether or not they can edit in the standard that you want to be publishing to, rather than where in the world they're located. Although having a local editor, as Ray said, can be very beneficial.
Second, yep.
yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Because alongside it goes,
Oh,
for example, most Americans can't tell practice from practice, being the C and the S.
yes, yes. That just depends on where you are as to what you're going to be dealing with, and that's localization as well. So if you're taking it from UK to, or British English, I should say, to American English, that's just localization of spelling. And that's, but there's something that just popped up in chat that I want to touch on from Terry Talks Fiction. One thing is converting their price schedule to your local currency too. Yes, this can be very, very beneficial depending on the price schedule that your editor has. If you're in the US, hiring an editor from Australia can work out in your favor because of the price difference. Same with the UK. So, say, for example, someone in the UK hiring someone from South Africa can work out really, really well. Um, but it depends on the pricing schedule, because sometimes it works out to be the same, or sometimes it can be more expensive depending on how much they're charging per hour. So always check out the price, but price should be foremost in your thoughts. It's definitely, budget is definitely something you have to consider when you're hiring an editor, but you want to make sure that your editor, your first look is going to be what your editor can do for you, and whether or not you're getting value for money.
And whether or not they actually understand the written language of that you're writing in.
Well, yes, I would hope that all editors everywhere, we hope.
Yeah.
We know it's not the case, but we hope.
All right. So Justin Toons asks, how do you evaluate which editor is right for you? I guess that works the other way around too. Is how does the editor evaluate which author is right for them to work with?
Did you want to start, Rhea?
Sure. Yeah, I think part of that's, I mean, it's going to come down to whether or not they hit the red flags that matter to you. And then in both ways, I would say whether or not I will take on a piece of work is going to depend on whether or not I think the author has a coherent vision for it. Usually I like to receive like a summary of the work first, and I like to see some just information about like title, word count, those sorts of things. I like to get some surface level information just to see how serious are you about this work, and then we can talk about the developmental editing. But that's, I mean, that's a me thing. I think there are other editors follow similar processes, but you'll find varying degrees of selection among editors about, you know, whether or not some people will just take on anything that's in their genre, because, you know, they'll go by page count, just however much you're going to pay them for it. I think when you're looking for an editor, and when an editor is looking for you, the number one thing that I would say that's mutually beneficial is a good relationship. You want somebody that you can talk to, you can receive honest feedback from, that you don't mind when they tell you, hey, this isn't working. And if you have somebody who, you know, you approach and you're like, eek, it would be really scary if this person told me this isn't going to work. Like, I would, if this person had critiques for me and if they said something negative, I would take it to heart immediately. That's not a good editor for you. You should probably find somebody that you don't mind having a conversation, often difficult conversations with.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think, and finding, like, from an author's side of things, from being the writer's side of things, you want to be looking at getting sample edits, which is more difficult with developmental editing. But even just getting an idea of how that editor is going to work with your work and with you, and how they communicate, can be critical to developing that initial bond where you can work together. Like, it should be a partnership. It shouldn't be two people across the table from each other pushing and pulling a manuscript, that's a really poor relationship, and that's not what you want. You want to be on the same side working together on that manuscript. So if you're not a partnership, yeah, bail. Bail, bail, bail.
All right. Let's see. What was the next one? Yeah, Epic 9 was asking becoming an editor in Brazil, probably because there might not. I have no idea about what is down there to help them become an editor in Brazil.
I'm just having a quick look now in my groups. Proofreading, editing. I'm not sure at the moment. Look, what I'll do is I'll have a look afterwards. And who was asking the question? Sorry.
That was Epic 9,
Epic 9.
EPPIC 9.
EPPIC 9. Okay. What I'll do is afterwards I will have a look at in my editing groups and find out who the group is for Brazil, and then I will send you that information.
All right. So, next question is what is the recommended price for editing a 120k word novel? That, like I said, as Tal has already said a couple times, that is all depending on the editor. Some editors will charge less, some editors will charge more. Some editors do charge by the word, Tal, because we had that conversation.
Yep. But I've worked mine out so that it runs off of per hour rate, so it all works out in the wash. But I think going off of how much it's going to cost you to get your book edited, it really depends. By the word, nope. I worked it out. It's fine. Anyway, that's fair, Justin. How much it's going to cost you to get your work edited really depends on what kind of editing you need. What level is that? Is that light copy editing? Like, for example, if it's just copy editing, is it light, regular, heavy, super heavy? It really depends. Like, you're going to have to get your work assessed before anyone can tell you exactly how much it's going to cost.
Okay. And Rhea?
100% that. There's, yeah, it's editing. I have found like $300 to $400 differences between between multiple agencies for exactly the same thing, but then also like some agencies will say, oh, we do it all in one. It's holistic editing all at once, developmental and line editing, and I don't know why you would pair those services together at the
What?
same time.
That's worrying to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, pricing is going to be something that's just it's varying across the board, but more or less 120,000 words. You can probably depending on the editing you're looking for, line editing, I could imagine going for over 1,000 easily.
Oh, easily.
Yeah, because that's what Tal quoted me, was about $2,000 for my novel. I did the math.
So if I was charging for a very heavy line edit on 120,000, I would be looking at charging 4.8K. I'm not a cheap editor, but I do charge on par with the major associations. But yeah, that's what I would be looking at, and that would be my most expensive. So if I was to assess your work and find it to be, not so rough, then obviously that price would come right down. But yeah, again, it depends on your work.
Yeah. Okay, so next question, Writer Lee asks, you talked about the different standards of English. Is it possible to find an editor who specializes in different languages, so Italian, German, etc.?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're everywhere. We are insidious. We're everywhere. There's French editors, there's editors all over the world. So if you need one that works particularly in a set language, just hit up your editing association, and they'll be able to help put you in touch with someone,
I was
without
gonna,
a doubt.
I was gonna say, hit up your local World End. We'll family too, because there are so many people from different parts of the world, and so in Rhode Island, because I mean it's huge.
Yeah, yeah. World Anvil is massive. Love it.
I believe there's 1.5 million users.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
For something that's only 4 years old?
I didn't realize it was so young.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Um, so we should probably cover some things that we need to consider when we're looking at hiring an editor. That's sort of an important thing to touch on. So I think the first thing, obviously, you're going to be looking at, as we discussed just before, is budget. Like, what's your budget? And you have to be realistic about having a budget for an editor. Like, a professional editor is going to cost you money. That's just a realistic thing. But whether or not that's, for example, $4,800, whether or not that's going to be there, or if your budget is $2,000, you can find a good editor at any price point. It just means you might have to look a little bit harder. So consider your budget, not the budget of someone else, or what other people are telling you your budget should be. What is your budget, and where is that sitting at? And don't forget, you've got to cover your basics. So you've got your developmental editor if you're going for developmental editing as well as copy editing or line editing. You've got your line editor, you've got your cover image and artists, you've got formatting. So you've got to put all of this into your overall budget and find out just how much money you've got to play with. And then you've got to look at your editor, the editor that you're going to hire. Do you want an accredited editor? Do you want an educated editor? Or do you want a fledgling editor who is maybe not as, equipped with qualifications, but still works their butt off to do the right thing for you? So professionalism of your editor, you're going to pay for that too. You're going to pay for someone who is, more highly accredited, more highly educated. You're going to pay for people who have, 20 years experience. They're going to charge more than someone who has 5, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do a better job. So Rhea, what else would you consider when hiring an editor?
I mean, I would consider, yeah, qualifications are going to be fairly important. I wouldn't necessarily go for hard qualifications as much as I would go for what experience they have editing. I would ask them what, if they can share some titles they have edited, or some, if they've worked with well-known people, that's something that sometimes they can offer. You can also, but if that information isn't necessarily like on their page, usually that's something they would advertise if they can advertise it. Otherwise, I would go for, what you can even ask them what are their favorite books. I mean, things like that are going to be important for understanding whether or not they are versed enough, at least for developmental editing. For line editing, I think you're going to want more probably solid qualifications as far as like whether or not they're able to handle structure of language, etc. But as far as developmental editing goes, when I'm looking for a developmental editor, I would go for people who like what I'm writing, who like the things that I'm like, the genre or the art form that I'm trying to appeal to. They understand the audience. So I would go for someone who I have similar interests with, or they express a knowledge about the broader area that my book should fit in with.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important. I don't know if I'm missing some questions in chat, but I do want to address something really quickly. I'm assuming we're not going with, if you're not rich, you have no right to be writing anything. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think every writer has the right to get their voice out there. And for example, Reezy, Upwork, a couple of these other places, you can find great editors on these sites for a absolutely pittance of money. I know a couple of my colleagues who are highly trained, highly qualified editors. They go on there for passion projects, and that's not to say that you have to find someone who's going to want to be doing a passion project or anything like that. You can trade edit, you can self edit. I know, for example, coffee quills. Okay, Coffee Quills has put out a book. She edited it herself. It is fantastic. I found one error in the whole book. I found more errors in Stephen King books than I found in Coffee's books. Okay, you don't have to hire an editor at all. I probably shouldn't be saying that because I'm an editor and I want to sell myself, obviously. But as a writer, part of me rails against the whole idea that we have to hire all these professionals to help us out. Um, you don't need those professionals, in my opinion, but they sure as heck help.
That's
You
what I
could
was gonna
you
say
could
too.
teach yourself. You can teach yourself. You can do it yourself. It just takes a lot longer, um, and to do it at that massively professional level. Um, but that doesn't mean that you can't pull it off yourself. There are writers everywhere that pull it off on their own every single day, and we wouldn't have the industry that we have if they didn't, which is rich with great stories. So do it.
What I would say about hiring an editor, and especially the amount of money that it can cost, the prohibitive amount of money that it can cost, is I think of it more like college in a certain way, like a college class. College classes are incredibly expensive, but the amount of information, the amount that you will learn in one college class is a lot more, or a lot you'll get that information a lot faster than you will if you try to learn all of that information on your own.
Yes.
Now, same thing with editing. You're paying upfront a large amount of money, but you will learn a lot about your own writing and about how to edit and about what sorts of things you fall back on and how to fix them. You'll learn a lot of that way faster than you will if you try to do it on your own. But that doesn't mean doing it on your own is impossible, or like that it even has to be like that it can't be the first option. There are plenty of times that you don't need a class in you don't need to take every class in college, right? You can learn some things on your own. You can and be just as fine. It just may take longer.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't taken any classes in creative writing, and yet I'm still writing. Do I need editing? Of course I do. Can I do it myself? Yeah. It just means people who have been watching my creative uh, process are going to be going, well, when's it coming out? When's it I'm waiting. Come on, hurry up.
I think trying to put like a gatekeeper between people and publishing is really really dangerous. And as an author, I want to see my work out there. I want to put it in a book, and I want to have that book in my hands, and it's really exciting to me. And I know for me, I'm going to be hiring an editor because I can't see everything. And being an editor, I know that I can't see everything. Um, but I think also with exactly what Rhea was saying, it's an educational experience, and generally it'll mean that depending on how your editor charges. But for me, in my experience, um, I'll charge a client one thing, and then with their consequential books, I'll charge less because they're already putting into place everything that we've learnt and taught and talked about. They've put it into place in book two, so there's less work to do. So it goes down. Not every editor works that way, and I'm not going to speak to the ones who don't work that way, but um, it can cost less as you go.
Yeah. All right, we do have a few other questions, and we are getting close to the end. So let me just pull up the questions because I've got. Let's close that one. There we go. Uh, One of the questions is, what's your favorite aspect of being an editor, dev or line?
You can take this one first, Rhea, if you like.
Sure. My favorite aspect is getting to see a work from start to finish. I think there's something, and maybe not even start to finish, but to see. I love seeing things develop. I used to teach at university, and I loved working with students and seeing like their writing develop. And that's what made me like get into academic editing, was mentoring people on how to deliver their philosophies and these complicated ideas in ways that people can understand and read. And the same thing happens in fiction with getting a good story on the page, getting these complicated ideas out, so that in world building, all that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that I love seeing, and I love trying to build that with someone. So I think seeing the finished product and knowing where it came from, that's it's very magical to see that like learning process or that developmental process, just watching something bloom.
Yeah, I think for me it's very much the same. I love watching authors grow. That first manuscript that they give you, and you're like, okay, this is great, but it needs some work. And then when they get to the end, and you're just like, look what you created. Like, you listened and you did your own thing as well at the same time, and this product that you've got is just fantastic. And I love seeing it, and I love it when they send. I get a lot of comp copies that they send through to me, so I get out to my mailbox and I'm like, oh, what's this? Open it up and it's an author book, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's so exciting. Love seeing the product. It's so amazing.
All right. James Woodwright asks, the editor that does the layout and look of text, what are they called? If I remember correctly, that's the copy editor, isn't it?
The layout and look of text is either a copy editor or a formatter. It depends on exactly what's being referred to. But yeah, generally your basic editing is going to be copy editing.
Rhea, are you just gonna sit there nodding your head?
Yeah, it's the layout edit, yeah, layout editor, or sometimes, I mean, a lot of publishers usually handle that kind of stuff like in house. So it's not something that usually I think editors
You'd
handle
be
as
less
much of.
likely to deal with it as a developmental editor anyway. So, but you can have a book designer, interior designer, can deal with that kind of thing as well. It just depends on the level.
All right. And the last question I have at the moment is for those who cannot afford to pay scale, is it better to hire an amateur editor one can afford or to rely solely on oneself?
That's rough because it depends on the amateur editor. Are they new at editing, or are they amateur and as they aren't very, very good? Because an amateur editor can actually do a lot of damage to your work, and it depends on where your work is at as to whether or not that's going to improve it or make it worse. Um, so, finding someone who's cleaning up your work, great. Finding someone who's actively trying to do the right thing but damaging your work nonetheless is really problematic, and it's hard to know the difference if you aren't if you're not an editor. It's really hard to know the difference between who's doing what.
That's one of the reasons that I say, like, especially with developmental editing, where you can do a lot of damage very, very easily. You have to share that author's vision for the story from the beginning. And there are a lot of editors where they will read the story, or especially amateur editors, where they have their own vision, and it's not necessarily lining up exactly with yours, and that's where that damage is going to be done, where it's, you should maybe change this chapter a little bit, and then it throws the entire story off the rails. So when you're looking for an editor, you want to find someone who has the same passion for the same kinds of stories. If somebody like loved, if you, maybe you love Harry Potter and this person also liked Harry Potter, but they did you guys find the same plot errors in Harry Potter? Did you guys like have the same feelings about this one scene that you absolutely loved? Did they love that scene, or did they think that that scene was poorly written? Those sorts of things are going to really matter about how they're going to approach your story and where they think it may need fixing.
All right, and the best, in my opinion, the before an editor starts actually editing, right? Then maybe they should. I know this is my opinion, and I'm not an editor, but do a quick run through the story so they get an idea on where the story is, what the story is, and what. So, like for a developmental editor, this way they can go, oh, he has to get from here to here, but this point right here is what's going to mess it up.
Yeah, definitely. I know even as a line editor, my first pass is always looking at the story itself and the commas and spelling and everything else, not so much. It's always going to be getting that story in line first.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to be rating soon, and we're going to be rating. Where was it? There we go. We're going to be rating off to. Where is it? Description writing workshop, and which will be the lady writes. And if I those who want to know, here is the tracks for the next events. We are on track 1, I believe. Yes, we're track 1. So these will take you to the other tracks, if that's what you wish. And as the last thing, where can people find you online?
Rhea?
Yep. So I am Rhea. You can find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/lrhea. And you can also find me on Twitter at lrheagray.
I'm ElementEds. I am on Twitch, Instagram, pretty much everywhere as ElementEds, so you can find me there. And it's elementeds.com if you're looking for my website.
All right.
So, but yeah.
And we have one quick last minute question that popped in. Are self-publishing editors different from traditional editors?
These days, no. No. The publishing houses pay less than working with indie authors. So you'll find less and less work is being done on professional books, which is why you're finding more mistakes in professional books these days. But the freelancing is publishing houses, the big 5, hire freelancers. So the in-house editing positions aren't really a thing unless you're an acquisitions editor, which is a different job altogether.
Yep.
And you're right, Anastasia. How good it was shouldn't matter to the person who's meant to identify the broken bits. Unfortunately, they have to know where the broken bits are, so they have to know where the story is heading and how good the actual writing was in the first place. All right, so thank you all for coming in for this panel. And
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This has been fantastic.
Oh, yeah. So we're going to set up this raid, and it is the lady rates. So, well, here's the fun part. I am so used to doing this. I just have a one-button click. Because I use my whoops. Ow.
Yes, because Penguin and Random House joined. Yes. Yes, you're right, Natalia.
Okay. It's not letting me. Oh, I know why. Fine, we're gonna do
Thanks for
it.
being a great chat.
Oh, yeah,
You
thank
guys
you.
have been amazing.
We're gonna do it this way instead. There we go. And have a good day. And we're off.
Woo! I think that went really well.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, yeah, 'cause, I mean, a lot of the questions that the chat was asking was not a problem. So, yeah, those are questions I'd ask anyway. So that's why I was looking at the chat question. Going, you know what? This way segues in. Okay, that's perfect. Oh.
Yeah, no, it worked out well.
Yeah. So
Now I have to find the Brazil